Welcome to World of DaaS, a show for data enthusiasts. I'm your host, Auren Hoffman, CEO of SafeGraph. For more conversations, videos, and transcripts, visit safegraph.com/podcasts. My guest today is Will Lansing. Will is the CEO of FICO, a $14 billion market cap data analytics company famous for its FICO scores. He's also my co-author of the DaaS Bible 2.0. Welcome, Will. Really excited to talk with you. As you know, I'm super obsessed with standards, and the FICO scores are really kind of the core standard for consumer lending decisions. Now, what are some takeaways do you think other people can learn from FICO if they're trying to develop a standard in their own business?
Well, I guess we'll spend a little time on that because that's not a simple question to answer. But I would start with understand what question you're trying to answer. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to people who've come into me, with FICO and said, we want to be the FICO score of safe driving. We want to be this FICO score of healthcare. We want to be the FICO score of this and that. And of course, we're flattered that that's what they want to be. But I usually ask them, what exactly are you planning to predict? What question are you going to answer with this score? Because you have to strike a balance between what you're trying to do being narrow enough that it has utility to the people who would consume the score, and broad enough to be interesting and turn into a standard. So know what question you're trying to answer, I think is kind of the first thing I would try to do.
One of the things I really like about the FICO score is that it's super simple to consume. It might be really hard to make, but super simple to consume, right? It's a 3-digit integer. It's kind of very simple to kind of understand. And both from a consumer who's actually seeing the score and from, let's say, a bank or someone like a data scientist that's using that score. How much do you think of success of creating these standards is in the end, this kind of again, complex going in, but simplicity coming out?
I think that makes a big difference. I mean, it obviously depends on the application, but simplicity has all kinds of virtues. If you think about the way the FICO score developed, initially it was a private score done for individual lenders. And then over time, we developed a more public generic score that was built across multiple credit bureaus' data. And the simplicity helped. The simplicity made it easier for lenders to standardize on it. And later on, the simplicity helped us to build the brand because the consumers could relate to it. So I would say,
but there's this weird trade-off, right? Because the simplicity means it won't have everything, or it won't deal with this corner case, or it's kind of like a 70% solution rather than a 95% solution, right? How do you think about those trade-offs?
So it's a great point, and there are trade-offs. And so if you think about the lending continuum, we start with scores where what are we predicting? We're predicting a consumer's propensity to repay debt. Very simple question. How likely are you to repay debt in the future if we lend you money? And we can reduce that to a 3-digit number. And it's down and dirty. And it was the evolution of the FICO score. It took us from a world where you had an old-time bank vice president who knew Johnny when he had a newspaper route and knew that Johnny was a good egg and knew that George was a bad egg. And that was a laborious, difficult way to make credit decisions. And the whole idea of the score was to simplify it dramatically, let a minimum wage person or a machine make that decision. And so certainly for lower stakes lending decisions, it's enough and it does the job. And then but it doesn't always do the job. Sometimes you need more. And so we have software that incorporates other data that's not built into the scoring algorithm. But we have actually tried to strike a balance with the score. To your point about the complexity in the score, but reducing it to something simple. What we have is, we have the score, the 3-digit score that everyone knows about. Most people don't know that there are 32 reason codes behind the score. And so under the regulations, if a lender turns down a consumer, the lender has an obligation to explain to the consumer why he or she was turned down. And so we provide reason codes which explain why the score is what it is.
Yep.
And so a lender can say, they don't even have to publish the score to the consumer, although nowadays they do, but they can just say, we've declined to increase your credit line for the following reason. And the reason number 14 is you're overextended, or you've been late with your payments, or whatever it is. So reason codes give you that extra degree of subtlety that don't show up in the 3 digits, but they're obviously built into the algorithm.
Okay, got it. And you and I, we wrote this piece called DaaS Bible 2.0 about data standards. And at least for me, it was one of the most read pieces I've ever written, that we wrote together. And we kind of called out this thing where we said, like, the perfect is the enemy of the standard, right? That if you're trying to build like the most perfect standard, then it won't become a standard. People won't adopt it. And so if you're advising somebody else to kind of think this through, like where do you draw the line? How do you know you're at the right kind of point, the 70% point, or like, how do you know when to stop, essentially stop innovating on it so that it'll actually get more adoption? Like the QWERTY keyboard is certainly a very imperfect thing, or even a certain measurement like Unix time or some of these other things that we called out in the paper.
Well, so if you're thinking about the steps to creation and adoption of a standard, we said a minute ago, we think step 1 is know what question you're trying to answer.
Yep.
And that's obvious. The second step takes many, many steps, and that's become embedded, become the center of an ecosystem. And I don't think that you can become the center of an ecosystem if you strive for perfection. You'll never get adopted. You really do have to work your way there. And so, to use FICO as an example, we started out as private score, as I said, private scores for lenders, then more public scores available more broadly to multiple lenders. Then we had the same score work across different data sets, but it was all aimed at lenders. It was one constituency, which we understood, and so that was a step. But it was still, in a sense, it was imperfect. It wasn't enough to be an industry. It was an industry standard, but it was a fungible industry standard. But how do you get even more embedded than that? Well, obviously you continue to innovate, try to have more precision around the answer, the obvious kinds of things. But where we went with it was we tried to build more constituencies and get more usage of the score. So, for example, lenders, they often securitize their loans, and the investors want to know, well, what's the value of the loan I'm buying? And there's nothing like a FICO score to just let you know in a very quantitative way exactly what it is that you're buying.
And when they're packaging those loans, are they just saying, okay, the average FICO score or the median FICO score for this package is X? Is that how they securitize
they can do it. They can do it that way. Yeah, exactly. At a simple level, that's exactly what they do. And so, more utility, right? More utility for the score, and like a score or any standard for that matter is at some level it's a network business, and it exhibits network effects, meaning that the utility of the network goes up with the number of nodes on the network. And so if you're trying to establish,
just to join, so you started with like the lenders, and okay, now we've got some lender adoption, and then we've got another stakeholder, which is the investors, these people like buying the secured, as these things get securitized, and then ultimately you have like the consumers. Now every consumer knows their own FICO score, and so you've got, and I don't know if there are other stakeholders, maybe you have regulators and people in the Fed trying to understand, right? And so, and the more you have, obviously the more it becomes a standard. Is that the way you think about it?
That's exactly it. And that's just how it evolves. Those are the big 4 constituencies for the score, but they evolved over time. So, so it was lenders first, investors, regulators came next, really.
Okay.
Regulators, when they're trying to understand the risk profile, the portfolios of the lenders that they regulate, they often ask, what does it look like? What's the propensity to repay debt of this portfolio is essentially what they're asking in risk scenarios. And then finally, and the hardest one to crack, frankly, is the consumer. And what we did in that situation was, because I will tell you that 10 years ago, the aided awareness on the FICO brand was around 30% in the US. Today it's over 90. Today it's over 90%. Everyone knows
our
FICO
that's
score.
huge. Yeah.
And so, how did we do that? And the goal was very much to make the FICO score important to consumers, because that was kind of rounding out the ecosystem and getting us even more embedded. And again, I would start with this idea that provide utility, provide value, provide utility, and all else wonderful follows. And so that's kind of been our goal every step of the way. With the consumer, what we did was we gave away the score for free. We said to lenders, if you guys are using our score to make lending decisions, please feel free to share it with the consumer. You can put it on their bank statement, put it on your website, let people understand what a FICO credit score means. Not only that, but let's educate the consumers and help them to understand how to improve their score. I mean, the algorithms.
There's just so many articles on the internet about how do you improve your FICO score? What do you do? What are some of the things? What are the, and this is very, very helpful for our consumer.
We don't want it to be a black box. We don't want it to be a mystery. And so lenders can provide all kinds of benefits to their consumers by sharing the FICO score and their own mechanisms for making the decision about the loan with the consumer. And they're basically, teaching the consumer, you want a good FICO score so you can have better pricing on a loan or more credit capacity or whatever it is. And the way you get there is pay your bills on time and don't overextend yourself and so on, all those things. And so the education component is important. But I started this with, we made it free. We said, let's give it to consumers for free. And not surprisingly, many lenders were reluctant to do that because they thought, oh, we'll never get FICO out of here. If we give consumers a FICO score every month and they become sensitized to how important it is, it's going to be very hard for us to stop using FICO in the future. Yeah. Well, that's not a bad thing for FICO,
right?
And we're providing a lot of utility for the consumer. I mean, really, it's good for the lender, it's good for the consumer, but it's all part of becoming more embedded. So we are very much the center of the ecosystem, and now it's not even just the lenders. It's the lenders demand it, the consumers demand it, the investors demand it. I wouldn't say the regulators demand it, but they use it. And so
it's interesting because there are these businesses where they get spread to consumers or end users through their clients, and those become really, really powerful. I got an email recently from a bank saying you can interact with us better through Plaid. And they're basically marketing Plaid to me, which is so amazing and good for Plaid that they're doing that. And obviously, you benefited from something similar from all of your clients marketing you to the consumers.
Oh, we absolutely did. We had the lenders do it, and we had bureaus do it too. I mean, it's really been great. That part's been really great. Well, now, brand building is expensive. Yeah. And the amount of brand building that has to go along with trying to become a standard is not trivial. And so having a strategy where you can provide utility to partners who will then build your brand on your behalf, that's something to think through, because we did that.
Now, FICO is an analytics business, right? And then, you have these data businesses kind of rely on analytics businesses to essentially make that data much more useful. And then analytics businesses rely on data businesses as kind of the raw materials that go into the analytics. Like, how do you think these companies should think about this important partnership? And obviously there's some tension there. And then how should companies navigate that tension so they really build a real partnership?
Well, so with respect specifically to data and analytics, I think it's a symbiotic relationship. And, just as better decisions can be made by adding incremental data sets. Let's start with the data set with the most predictive value, and then add incremental data sets until it doesn't pay to do it anymore, diminishing return set in. The same goes with the analytics. The analytics, apply analytics until you're kind of wasting your time. It's a level of precision you don't need. And then put the two together and let's use analytics to look across data to get a better answer than we would if we looked at more limited data. So I think it's very much a symbiotic relationship, and the analytics companies benefit from the data. The more data, the better. The data companies should benefit from strong analytics because better decisions will be made. So I think they work together.
because in kind of the FICO case, you've got these credit bureaus. So in the US, we've got TransUnion, Equifax, Experian, right? These credit bureaus there, and they're creating this like incredible data of, essentially a payment history of somebody. Did they pay their utility bills on time, et cetera? And then that's kind of like the raw material. Right, then they send that raw material over to FICO, and you're basically creating a prediction on it. So basically they're sending you the past, and you're creating some sort of prediction on the future. Their raw materials are not as valuable without you. You're not as valuable without them, right? Is this the way you think about it? Like there's kind of a virtuous circle, essentially a flywheel between the two of you guys.
There's absolutely a virtuous circle, and a FICO score would be worthless without the underlying data. I mean, it's as simple as that. Without it, we couldn't even have the score. We provide but we actually don't take the data. I mean, we are not a data company. We don't touch the data. After creating the score, we turn over the algorithm to the bureaus, and they apply it to their own data and then provide it to the lenders. Yep. So we have. It's not church and state, but we definitely, we're analytics, pure analytics. We don't take the data, and they're tremendous partners and custodians of the algorithm, and then they go and use it. But it is very much a virtuous circle. That's right. And frankly, we're always trying to innovate with our data partners, with the bureaus. How do we get to a better score? How do we score populations that have been previously unscored? There are people. The credit card payment history is the cornerstone of the FICO score, and it's the cornerstone of our credit lending system in the US. There's a lot of people who don't have credit cards. And so, but they may still be very responsible, and they may be good credits. We just don't know it because we don't have their credit card payment history, because it's catch-22. They don't have a credit card yet.
Yeah.
So is there other data that we can look at that is evidence of responsibility that would suggest to us these are people we should be lending to? And so we work with the bureaus to try to innovate and identify other data that can get us to the same place.
And that can be as simple as you paid your rent on time, or other types of things like that.
Exactly. The rent, utility payments, those phone bills, those kinds of things. But it could also be your checking account. How often do you overdraw? If you don't overdraw at all, that's evidence of responsibility. Yep. So, I think there's a lot of different things you could look at that'll get you to good answers. And so we do partner with our data partners to innovate and build new scores to accomplish new things around the edges that we haven't been able to do before.
And in some ways, this is like a very, very key partnership for FICO. You have these credit bureaus, they're core partners. I'm sure you're on the phone with them all the time, talking with this other CEOs of these companies. It kind of reminds me of like the 90s, the classic, 1990s partnership between Microsoft and Windows and Intel. As Windows did better, Intel did better. As Intel did better, Windows did better. And they formed this very, very, very important partnership. Do you think of it like in a similar way? And obviously, where does the tension come in? And how do you guys like navigate? Do you guys just do you get on the phone with them like, hey, let's deal with this? Because there's going to be tension in any relationship that comes up over time.
There of course is a little bit, but not really. I mean, we work pretty hard to take the tension out and the friction out, and we work pretty smoothly together. We both benefit through adoption of our solution. A way to think about it is if you think about what the bureaus do and what FICO does together, our system as a platform, as a lending platform. If you think about it that way, Bill Gates, I think, is famous for a definition of platform business where the platform provider is much smaller than the revenues of all the participants in the platform, those who use the platform.
Yeah, it's gotta be like 20x or something like that.
And there's something to be said for that in this case, right? We're partnered with Experian, partnered with Equifax, and constantly trying to improve what it is that we do, more precision, score more people, get more credit out to more people, the best way we know how, using science. And the benefit to the participants in the ecosystem is much greater. Obviously, it's many-fold the size of our little world.
Yeah, there's kind of this like, in some ways, do you think of it like as at least in data and data businesses, there's one side which the kind of way we think of it as maybe like truth. This happened. This is true. It's clearly happened. It happened in the past, right? And then there's this other side, sometimes I call it religion, but this is what we expect to happen in the future. We don't know for sure, right? And so we're going to give you some sort of percentage chance that this will happen in the future. So if you think of it as if you have data about the AT&T stock price or something like that, we know the ticks of AT&T going back over 100 years. Maybe the tick 100 years ago was like 1 tick per day. Now it's like 1 tick per tenth of a second or something like that. So we know that what the AT&T stock price has done over the last 100 years. Now I'm going to predict what it's going to do over the next year. That's obviously a prediction, and it may not turn out to be correct. You're more in the prediction business, and something like Experian, Equifax, TransUnion is more in the kind of here's what happened in the past business. Is that the way you think about it? Or
I think if you ask them, they'd say they're also in the direction of trying to predict. But I would say that it's a fair characterization. Everything we do is built around what do we think a consumer will do in the future? What's the behavior going to be? How are we going to guess that? We're going to guess that based on what behavior we've seen in the past. So we look at past behavior, we look at the historical data, the backward-looking data, and then we model it. We build models and say, okay, based on that, what do we think will happen in the future? What's so interesting is how consumer behavior repeats itself in so many different ways. I mean, it turns out that good credits, tend to be good drivers, tend to be good students. There's all this correlation with good behavior. So you can look at a lot of different data sets to get to a place. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, in some way, in SafeGraph, we're a data company, but our motto is that we predict the past. So we are clearly about the past, not about the future. And then we have so many clients that take our data and then help use our data about the past to predict the future. But we're clearly about this happened. We're going to put our name behind that. This clearly happened, but we don't tell you what will happen. That's not what we're about. And in some ways, it is kind of the difference between a data business and an analytics business.
I think
right?
That's
There's
right.
some sort of line. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Now, how do you think now? Let's talk a little bit about pricing. How do you think about pricing for standards, right? If you charge too much, then it'd be very hard to become a standard. And of course, once you're a standard, you have some sort of monopoly power to charge more. But if you start to exercise that monopoly power to charge more, then people might be very incented to leave you and go somewhere else. So there's almost a check on the pricing power of a standard. Like, how do you think through that at FICO, and how should other standards think through that?
I think you're absolutely right about that. We live in a world where it's increasingly easy to change a standard if a standard fails you in some way. So yeah. I think you have to be mindful of that, and you have to be very careful with the pricing. I would say that
because when I look at, I don't know that much about lending, but when I look at the FICO, how much you guys charge for things, it doesn't seem like a lot. It seems like you charge very little. Maybe I'm talking your book too much or becoming a FICO salesperson, but I feel like you guys have strategically decided to charge less than you can because you want to maintain this standard. Am I getting that right, or are you thinking about it a different way?
You're absolutely getting it right. So if you start with the premise that the best standard is free, okay, from an adoption standpoint,
yes,
the best standard is free. And then you move from that to, well, I'd like to monetize it a little bit, and frankly, I'd like to be able to fund R&D and innovation and make the standard better. Okay, so now we can charge a little bit, and I think
somebody has to pay to run the standard. There is always some cost. So sometimes government can run it. Maybe you can set and forget it, like the meter. We've set and forget it, and there's some sort of way, but usually there's some sort of thing where you still have to run, and there's some cost around that, right? So
yeah, and it might not be a very high cost, but there's something there. But also, if you want to make it better, innovation costs money. Research costs money. I guess what has guided FICO, and whether it's right or wrong, I can't tell you. It's worked well for us. Is we've always charged a fraction of the value that we create. So we look very hard at the value gap. What is our customer getting from using it? How, what's the scale? What are the stakes in the decision that they're making? How much does our standard help them with that decision? How much does our score help them with that decision? And then we charge a fraction of the amount of the value that they get. And so there's a huge value gap. That doesn't mean that we won't attract competition, because we will.
Yeah.
But it does mean that we don't give customers an easy reason to switch, because it's typically not about price. We do the job as well as it can be done, and then and they get tremendous value out of it. So that works pretty well. I think if you're trying to start a standard, the closer to free you can start, the better. And over time, I think you characterize it correctly, which is be mindful of the influence that you have, and don't abuse it. Don't be thoughtful about it. And I think it's worked well for us. Put it that way. It's not that we don't have competition. It's not that other people couldn't develop scores, but so much value in it.
Well, the nice thing about a standard, once you have a standard or something approaching a standard, is that your cost for acquiring new customers goes down dramatically, right? And so you have these CAC costs that start going down. So in some ways, you can afford to keep the prices quite low, because you don't have all of these expensive costs to acquire a company that somebody like a traditional SaaS company may have, where there's all this competition. And so SaaS companies always have to raise their prices because they have such high costs to acquiring customers. Am I right about that, or am I a little bit off on?
There's certainly a benefit. There's certainly a benefit. I mean, so for example, we don't advertise. FICO's advertising budget is basically zero.
Yeah,
close to zero.
Yeah,
and yet when consumers are interested in their score, they'll sometimes come to myfico.com and buy that service from us, the score monitoring service.
Yeah,
we have partners who are tremendous at consumer marketing, who are really strong at it, and they've built big businesses leveraging the FICO score. The FICO score helps them to attract consumers, but they pay for that. There's a cost with that. They and they spend the money on the marketing. It's our brand. They're spending the money on the marketing. So that works out really nicely for us, where we have an ecosystem where they can benefit by building our brand. That's pretty great. So yeah, we do that. It helps. It definitely helps. And your point about the cost of customer acquisition, it definitely goes down. There's obviously some players that are much better at acquiring customers than others. I wouldn't say that we're, at the top of that. We're not really a consumer company.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even when acquiring a new bank or acquiring a new, all these different customers that you have, I imagine that maybe you have every bank, but I imagine that your CACs are so low compared to any other comparable software company that's trying to acquire a customer.
Well, I would say that banks know who we are.
Yeah,
it definitely lowers the cost we might otherwise have, although it's not free to cover banks, I'll tell you that.
There's somewhat of a difference between a standard and a currency, right? In some ways, FICO is both. There's a standard, but then because everyone's using it and securitizing everything, it's also kind of a currency that people use. And I guess you could be a standard without a currency. You could be a currency without a standard, but gosh, if you're both, it's really, really nice. Where does that change, or how do you think about that curve, and how do you really push that curve along so you can become both a standard and a currency?
I think that's right. There's something of a continuum there, and I think that what drives the if you want to call it the currency, that aspect of it is really increasing returns and network effects that come from having a lot of nodes on the network. So to the earlier
different
point
stakeholders,
I mean, the reason FICO sits at the center of the lending ecosystem is it provides tremendous utility. Why does it provide that utility? Because the number of nodes on that network are just immense, and there's very high utility for all the participants. Everyone participating has very high utility, and so you want to call that a currency? You can call it a currency. I mean, the fact is that the utility to each of the participants is what makes it a currency, right? It's a trade. I'm going to buy a FICO score from you so that I can make a lending decision, so I can sell my paper to an investor, and the consumer cares too. So I mean, it all hangs together.
What are some additional standards in the financial industry that maybe our listeners wouldn't know as much about, maybe not as well known as FICO, that you really admire or you like?
Well, there's a lot, and there's the ones of course.
Yeah.
Dow Jones is a standard, S&P 500 is a standard, Russell 2000 is a standard. Those are obvious ones.
Yeah.
Then you have standards. MSCI has ETFs are a form of standard, and that you can see how that kind of evolves. Moody's and S&P bond ratings are, are standards that have evolved and have an ecosystem built around them. Actually similar to the FICO ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, one of the interesting things about, like, if you think about the S&P 500, is because so many things are tied to the S&P 500, so many things are judged on that. There's obviously so much money from like BlackRock and Vanguard in that it's kind of this like self-fulfilling thing too. Like once enough people buy into it, even as imperfect as it is, and you can read a gazillion papers about how the S&P 500 is incredibly imperfect, but it doesn't matter. Like once enough people start buying into it, it becomes it almost has its own legs, its own type of thing, and keeps moving forward.
No, that's absolutely right. But actually, it's an interesting case because you could argue that Dow Jones standard is less perfect than the S&P 500, which is why people use the S&P 500. You could argue that the Russell 2000 or the Russell 3000 provides a different level of kind of predictiveness and a similar kind of a standard. So, I mean, it is kind of interesting to see how these things evolve. But absolutely, once you're at the center of an ecosystem, it's a good place to be.
Yeah, it is really interesting how, like, it does seem like the bigger one now is the S&P 500, whereas maybe 30 years ago, it was the Dow Jones Industrial Average was the bigger ones that people talked about. And then, of course, you have the Russell 2000, and you have all the, but it does, for whatever reason, there's like more money and more hedge funds are tracking the S&P 500 today than are looking at some of these other indexes. And you're like, all these indexes are they're all imperfect, whether it's GDP or whatever index that we're using, but we're using.
You know what I would point out about all these indices that we just mentioned is that they're all trying to answer some kind of a question. I mean, if you think about the ETFs, I'm going to select a number of companies put into this ETF. And then it's going to have certain kind of characteristics. It's going to move. It'll be correlated with oil, or it'll be inversely correlated with oil.
Yeah.
Someone wants to answer some kind of a question, so we're going to build an index and a score and a standard that does that. And so there's some. It all starts with there's some question that's getting answered with this bundle of stuff that we've turned into a standard.
Outside of like FICO and of course SafeGraph, like what are some data companies or analytics companies that you admire?
Well, I would start with close to home. I think Experian and Equifax are two really fine companies that have done incredible things. Between the two of them, you're talking about 60, 70 billion of market cap that reflects the value that they're providing to their customers. They've done a remarkable job of taking data that used to be throwaway data and doing something meaningful with it. And in the process, building the foundation of the credit system in the United States, which is really the envy of the world.
Yeah, and increasingly globally, right? I mean, they're becoming very. Experian is huge in Brazil, and these companies are all over the world. One of the things I admire about these credit bureaus, I throw TransUnion in there as well, is that they really increase the credit availability to anyone. It used to be that, as you mentioned, like the credit manager would know Bob and know Bob's family and stuff like that, but they may have their own implicit biases, or maybe maybe whether racial biases or just like religious or other types of biases, that they thought Bob was a person of high character and maybe Jim was a person of lower character. And one of the nice things that these data companies and FICO has done is it's really just democratized access to credit. And imperfect as everything is, it's really about creating these like much bigger whitelists for people to have access to credit. It used to be the whitelist was very, very, very small. Now, yes, maybe the whitelist still could be bigger, but it's probably 100 times bigger than it used to be. And so way more people have access to these really important tools in life than did in the past.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. I know. No, I think they've done a remarkable thing. And it's not just credit data, right? All data companies should be thinking about how we're going to make the world a better place. by putting the data into use, having analytics applied, answer questions that create markets, that make more customers, that provide access to all kinds of things. It's not just credit. So there's a lot of opportunity.
All right, now I've got a couple of more personal questions for you as well. Now, I've known you for a while. You're definitely one of the, I would say, the more relaxed CEOs that I've ever met. And look, and no one can argue with your success. I think the FICO stock is up over 15x since you joined 9 years ago. How do you, and you've got this huge global operation that you're managing, but you're always pretty chill and relaxed. What advice would you give? I'm certainly, I'm a CEO of a much less successful company than you, but I'm certainly a lot less chill than you are. What advice would you give other CEOs of just how to manage a global operation?
Some of this may sound very obvious, but I would say what I would do is I'd share with you our 3 corporate values, because I think it's the whole game is people. You have great people in a company, and the company does great things. And for us, our 3 corporate values are: 1, think like an owner. Yep. So we tell our employees, look, treat this like a family business. Think like an owner. If you're doing something that you think is a waste of time, or you disagree with your boss about it, whether you're spending money or your own time on it, or the time of your developers, or whatever it is, you have an obligation to speak up. This is your business. Treat it like a family business. So number 1, think like an owner. 2, delight your customers. That's not exactly unique to FICO, but I think not every company tries to do that as much as it should. And only wonderful things follow from having that kind of an attitude. And then finally, 3, our 3rd value is earn the respect of others. And that's really about participating in a company. It's a team effort, and you want to bring people along, and you want people to look up to you for whatever. You want to be that person that people call and say, hey, will you come to this meeting with me and help me close the sale? Will you want to be that person. Yeah. And that combination of values, which are pretty loose and somewhat general, and motherhood and apple pie, but that combination of values has produced a culture at FICO that's very family oriented, very constructive, not a lot of politicking, not a lot of turf stuff. And it's been really successful for us. So I invite anyone listening to steal these values, run with them.
All right. Well, another question. I've gotten to know you and your wife, Megan, and you guys have a really amazing relationship. And I guess really just it's more of more of a personal, what is the secret? And again, I know there's no secret, but are you bringing in data? You're a very data oriented guy, or analytics into this relationship and somehow, and mapping it out, or how do you guys navigate it in a way for the rest of us? How can we learn something?
I'm not sure we bring some data to it. I would say what we mostly bring to it is game theory. So, the game theorists, theorists who are here know of the boxing and ballet example, which is he likes to go to boxing matches, she likes to go to ballet, he hates ballet, she hates boxing, but they both love spending time with each other. And the answer to maximize utility in that particular game is, remember, it's a multi-round game. Yeah. And why don't we both go to boxing now, and next time we'll both go to ballet, and then we'll both go to boxing the time after that. And you maximize the utility for the 2 of you by doing it.
But wouldn't and just to stress, if one person really doesn't like boxing, one person really doesn't like ballet, wouldn't it be better to find a 3rd thing that you both kind of and go together, or is it really just it's really good to delight, where if you really care about this, let's do it together, and I want to support you in doing this thing? Yeah,
obviously, you find things you both love to do, great. Part of the theory in the game theory exercise is that you get satisfaction out of doing things together, even if you don't love the thing. But the point's right. The point's right. It's what you want to do is bend on the things that are important to your partner, and hope that they bend on the things that are important to you, and everyone will be happier.
Okay. All right. I like that. That's really okay. Last question. This is the question we ask all of our guests. What would you tell yourself, if you go back to Will Lansing in college or in high school, to save yourself either time or money or emotional well-being? What advice would you give to your younger self?
Well, this is advice for CEOs and all high achievers, because we're all, we kind of operate at as close to a 10 as we possibly can. We're super driven. Everything we do flat out. And I'm no different. And I got pretty deep into endurance sports 15, 20 years ago and did a lot of marathons and triathlons and that sort of thing. And I overdid it. I blew out a few discs. I can't run anymore. And if I had to do all over again, I would probably just keep my running to 5 miles a day, and I'd probably still be running today and be a very happy person. And so I think there is a lesson in moderation. I think you should think about diminishing returns. I mean, especially for people who are wired to try to do everything at the extreme. It makes some kind of sense to take a step back, think a little bit about the consequences, think a little bit about diminishing returns. That's what I would tell myself 15 years ago.
Oh, this is really interesting. Let's dive into that a little bit more. So, I mean, how do you know? Yeah, maybe if it's like a hobby or something like that, you could say, okay, like you have a hobby of, doing like crazy triathlons, and you should go a little bit easier on your body or something like that. But like in work, it might be a little bit harder to know, should I work super hard at this thing, or should I operate 110%, or should I operate at 70% and then survive longer? Like how does one even know when to make those trade-offs?
Yeah, please don't interpret my advice as, it's okay to be a slacker.
Right.
And work-life balance, while we believe in it to some extent, I think most of the really high achievers favor work over work-life. I think you have to recognize kind of the stage of life you're at, the opportunity in the company you're working in, and what you need to do to be successful. And there's times, there's times to be flat out, 11's on the dial for a reason. Yeah. But
the longevity is important. And also kind of like, in some ways, if you think of the investing analogy, the Warren Buffett, like investing analogy, like there's some margin of safety also that you need to have, in whether in your life or in your career, but it's a little bit easier to quantify in investing than it is in life. Like, how do you?
I work on the theory that, most of us achievers are flat out on everything we do all the time. We're kind of wired to do 10 or 11. And so all I'm saying is ask yourself if every single one of the things you're applying that to, it makes sense. There's probably a time to dial it back. It could be for a family thing. It could be on exercise. It could be on something.
Okay, this is great. Well, thank you. This has been awesome. I've learned a lot. Thank you, Will. This is really good. I really appreciate your time.
Great fun to be with you, Auren. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the show, consider leaving a review. For more World of DaaS, and that's DaaS, DaaS, you could subscribe right here on our YouTube channel, or you could find me on Twitter at Auren, Auren, Auren. I'd love to hear from you.